The hardest people to recognize are the ones who only wear their mask when everyone is watching. For years, I believed I was one of the lucky ones. Whenever people talked about difficult daughters-in-law, I would smile and quietly think about Amanda. My name is Helen Brooks. I am 69 years old, and if you had asked me a year ago what I thought of my daughter-in-law, I would have told you she was one of the kindest women I had ever known. Everyone seemed to agree. Amanda never forgot a birthday. She always brought something thoughtful to family gatherings. She called regularly to check on me after my husband passed away. She remembered my favorite tea, asked about my doctor appointments, and never missed an opportunity to tell people how much she appreciated me. If there were awards for being the perfect daughter-in-law, Amanda would have won them all. At least that was what everyone believed. After my husband, Richard, died 3 years ago, life became much quieter. The house felt larger than it had before. Some mornings I would pour 2 cups of coffee before remembering I only needed 1. Those were difficult days, and Amanda seemed determined to help me through them. Every Sunday afternoon, she would stop by with groceries or homemade soup. She would sit at my kitchen table and listen while I talked about old memories. Sometimes she even insisted on helping around the house. "You have done enough for everyone else your whole life," she would say. "Now it is our turn to take care of you." Those words always touched my heart. My son Jason adored her. Friends at church admired her. Even my neighbors commented on how fortunate I was. More than once, someone said, "Helen, you hit the jackpot with that daughter-in-law." And honestly, I believed it. Looking back now, I realized something important. People rarely question what they want to believe. I wanted to believe Amanda cared about me. I wanted to believe that after losing my husband, I still had family who genuinely looked out for me. So whenever something felt slightly off, I ignored it. There were little moments, tiny things, nothing dramatic, nothing worth mentioning at the time. Occasionally Amanda would speak for me when someone asked my opinion. Sometimes she would make decisions about family plans before discussing them with me. Other times I noticed she seemed more interested in how things appeared than how they actually felt. But each time, I explained it away. Maybe she was trying to help. Maybe I was being sensitive. Maybe grief had made me overthink things. That became my habit. Excusing, explaining, defending. Then one afternoon, during a family barbecue at Jason and Amanda's house, I stood quietly near the patio while several relatives complimented her. They praised her kindness, her generosity, and her devotion to family. Amanda smiled graciously and accepted every compliment. As I watched her laugh and thank everyone, I felt proud of her, proud of my son, proud of the family we had built. At that moment, I had no idea that the image everyone admired and the reality I would eventually discover were not the same thing at all. In fact, the woman everyone envied was about to teach me one of the most painful lessons of my life. Sometimes the people who look the most caring are simply the most skilled at making care look convincing. Over the next several months, I continued seeing the version of Amanda that everyone else saw. She remained thoughtful, attentive, and seemingly devoted to family. If I mentioned a doctor appointment, she would call afterward to ask how it went. If I looked tired at a gathering, she would immediately offer to help carry dishes or clean up. To anyone watching, she appeared to be exactly the kind of daughter-in-law every mother hopes for. The strange thing was that the moments that bothered me were never the public ones. They happened quietly, almost invisibly, and they disappeared so quickly that I often questioned whether they had happened at all. One example came during a family dinner at Jason and Amanda's house. We were discussing vacation plans for the summer when Jason asked where everyone wanted to go. Before I could answer, Amanda smiled and said, "Helen probably would not enjoy all that travel. She likes staying close to home these days." The statement sounded harmless. In fact, several people nodded sympathetically. The only problem was that nobody had asked me yet. I actually love traveling. A few months earlier, I had mentioned wanting to visit Maine again because Richard and I had spent part of our honeymoon there. Yet somehow my opinion had been replaced by Amanda's version of it. I remember opening my mouth to respond, then closing it again. Maybe she was only trying to help move the conversation along. Maybe she misunderstood. Later that evening, I convinced myself it was not worth mentioning. That became a pattern. During another gathering, a relative asked whether I would be hosting Thanksgiving. Before I could answer, Amanda explained that she was already organizing everything because it would be easier for me. Everyone praised her generosity. I thanked her. Yet something about the exchange stayed with me afterward. Not because she offered help, but because she never asked whether I wanted it. Then there were the compliments. Amanda loved receiving compliments. At first, I thought nothing of it. Most people enjoy being appreciated. But over time, I began noticing how carefully she positioned herself to receive them. If she brought food to a family event, she made certain everyone knew she had prepared it. If she helped someone, the story often resurfaced later in conversation. Her kindness always seemed to arrive with an audience. One afternoon at church, a friend approached me and said, "Amanda is wonderful. She told us how much time she spends helping you since living alone became difficult." The comment surprised me. Living alone was not difficult. Sometimes it was lonely, but that was different. I managed my home, my finances, my appointments, and my daily life perfectly well. Yet somehow the image being presented to others suggested something else. Again, I defended Amanda. Maybe she was trying to make people understand what widows go through. Maybe I was overthinking things. That became my favorite explanation. Maybe I was overthinking things. Looking back now, I realized that phrase protected Amanda more than it protected me. Every small discomfort was buried beneath another excuse. Every uneasy feeling was explained away before it had a chance to grow. Yet despite all my efforts, one fact became increasingly difficult to ignore. Amanda's words always sounded caring. But whenever I looked closely at the results, they seemed to place her at the center of every story and me somewhere in the background. At the time, I still refused to believe it meant anything. I had not yet reached the point where doubt felt stronger than trust. But for the first time, I began to notice that the two were quietly competing with each other. The moment that truly stayed with me happened on a Sunday evening in early autumn. Jason and Amanda had invited the family over for dinner. The weather was cooling down, and everyone gathered around a long dining table decorated with candles and seasonal flowers. It was the kind of evening that looked perfect in photographs. Laughter filled the room. Sophie talked about school. Jason discussed work. Amanda moved effortlessly between conversations, making sure everyone's glass stayed full and every plate remained covered. Watching her, nobody would have questioned her sincerity for a second. Neither would I. At least not yet. Halfway through dinner, the conversation turned toward a charity event our church planned to host later that year. Several people were discussing volunteer opportunities when Amanda suddenly smiled and said, "Helen has decided not to participate this year. She told me she wants to slow down and avoid taking on too much." The statement caught me completely off guard. I looked up from my plate. I had never said that. In fact, only a few days earlier I had filled out a volunteer form because I was looking forward to helping. Before I could respond, Amanda continued speaking. "I told her she deserves to rest and enjoy herself. She has spent her whole life taking care of other people." Everyone nodded approvingly. Several relatives agreed that I should not overextend myself. Again, Amanda sounded thoughtful, caring, protective. Yet I sat there wondering why she was speaking for me at all. Finally, I smiled politely and corrected the misunderstanding. "Actually, I was planning to volunteer." Amanda laughed lightly. "Oh, maybe I misunderstood." The moment passed. Quickly. Nobody seemed bothered. Neither did Amanda. Yet I could not shake the feeling afterward. It was not the first time she had spoken on my behalf. It was simply the first time I knew with complete certainty that what she said was not true. Driving home later that evening, I replayed the conversation in my mind. I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. Perhaps she genuinely misunderstood. Perhaps she confused me with someone else. Yet another part of me kept returning to a different question. Why did these misunderstandings always seem to reduce my involvement in things? Why did they always portray me as less active, less interested, or less capable than I actually was? The following week brought another strange moment. Jason called to tell me about a family outing being planned for the following month. During the conversation, he casually mentioned that Amanda had already assumed I would not want to attend because the drive would be too long. Once again, nobody had asked me. Once again, someone else had decided what I supposedly wanted. This time I felt something I had not felt before. Not anger. Not yet. Disappointment. Because I realized these were not isolated moments anymore. They were becoming a pattern. Amanda always used kind words. She always sounded considerate. Yet the outcome remained remarkably consistent. Her version of helping often involved reducing my choices before I even had the chance to make them myself. Still, I resisted drawing conclusions. I continued defending her in my own mind. I continued telling myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. but a small crack had formed in the image I carried of her. For years, I had judged Amanda primarily by what she said. Now, for the first time, I found myself paying closer attention to what her actions actually accomplished. And the more closely I looked, the harder it became to ignore the difference between the two. The first time I truly felt unwelcome happened so quietly that nobody else noticed it. In fact, if someone had watched the entire situation unfold, they probably would have thought nothing was wrong. That was becoming Amanda's specialty. Nothing she did ever looked openly cruel. Nothing sounded disrespectful. Yet somehow I always seemed to leave certain situations feeling smaller than when I arrived. The occasion was Sophie's 17th birthday dinner. Amanda had spent weeks planning it. Family members talked about the decorations, the menu, and the effort she had put into making everything special. As usual, everyone praised her organization and thoughtfulness. I praised her too. The celebration took place at a popular restaurant about 20 minutes from my home. When I arrived, several relatives were already seated around a long table in a private dining area. The room buzzed with conversation and excitement. Sophie looked beautiful and happy. Seeing her smile immediately lifted my spirits. I greeted everyone and looked for my place setting. At first, I assumed I simply had not spotted it. Then I noticed that every seat had a printed name card except one. Mine. I smiled awkwardly and waited. Amanda quickly approached and explained that there had been a last-minute adjustment because more guests had attended than expected. She directed me toward a chair positioned near the far end of the table. It was not technically separate from everyone else, but it was noticeably removed from the center of the celebration. Once again, her explanation sounded reasonable. Once again, nobody else seemed concerned. So I sat down and told myself it did not matter. Yet as dinner progressed, I could not ignore how different the experience felt. Conversations happened several feet away. Family photographs were taken without anyone realizing I had been left outside the frame. Several guests who arrived later naturally assumed I was a friend of the family rather than Sophie's grandmother because of where I was sitting. None of these things were major offenses, but together they created a feeling I struggled to describe. For the first time, I felt like a guest observing my own family instead of belonging to it. The moment that stayed with me happened during Sophie's birthday toast. Jason stood and shared memories from her childhood. Several relatives added stories and kind words. Then Amanda spoke. Her speech was warm, emotional, and beautifully delivered. Everyone applauded. As I listened, I waited for an opportunity to share something as well. After all, I had spent 17 years loving and supporting that girl. But before I had the chance, Amanda smoothly transitioned the evening toward cake and gifts. The moment passed. Nobody intentionally silenced me. Nobody told me I could not speak. Yet somehow my opportunity disappeared anyway. Driving home later that night, I replayed the evening repeatedly. I kept telling myself that I was being unfair. Amanda had organized an entire celebration. She was probably stressed. Seating arrangements sometimes changed unexpectedly. Toasts could become disorganized. There were countless innocent explanations. And yet one uncomfortable fact refused to leave my mind. Whenever these situations occurred, the result was always the same. Amanda remained at the center. Everyone else received attention. And somehow I became less visible. The following morning, I looked through photos from the dinner that relatives had posted online. Smiling faces filled every image. Family members stood together laughing and celebrating. I appeared in only one photograph. It had been taken accidentally in the background. As I stared at the screen, I felt something I had spent months trying to avoid. For the first time, I stopped asking whether I was imagining things and started wondering whether I had simply been refusing to see them. 3 days after Sophie's birthday dinner, she stopped by my house after school. It was not unusual. Sophie and I had always been close. Ever since she was little, she liked sitting at my kitchen table while I baked cookies or prepared dinner. Some habits survive even as children grow older. That afternoon, she arrived carrying a backpack and a tired expression. I made hot chocolate, and we settled into our usual chairs. At first we talked about ordinary things. School assignments, friends, college plans. Nothing unusual. Then she glanced toward me and asked a question that immediately caught my attention. "Grandma, are you upset about my birthday dinner?" I hesitated. "Why would you ask that?" Sophie looked uncomfortable. "I do not know. Mom said you seemed disappointed." The comment surprised me. I had not spoken to Amanda about the dinner afterward. In fact, I had worked very hard to hide my feelings from everyone. Did she say anything else? I asked gently. Sophie stirred her drink before answering. Not really. She just said that sometimes you take things personally because you miss Grandpa. For a moment, I did not know what to say. The statement sounded sympathetic on the surface, yet something about it bothered me deeply. Once again, Amanda had created an explanation for my feelings without ever asking me about them. Before I could respond, Sophie continued. Honestly, Grandma, I thought it was strange. I looked up. What was strange? She shrugged. The seating thing. My heart skipped slightly. Until that moment, I had assumed nobody else noticed. Sophie looked relieved as soon as I mentioned it. I knew I was not imagining it, she said. I actually asked Mom why your place card was moved. I tried to remain calm. What did she say? Sophie frowned. She told me it made more sense because you were quieter and would probably be more comfortable over there. The words settled heavily between us. Not because they were cruel, but because they sounded painfully familiar. They fit the same pattern I had been noticing for months. Decisions being made for me. Assumptions presented as facts. Preferences assigned to me without my knowledge. Sophie stared into her mug for several seconds before speaking again. Grandma, can I tell you something without getting anyone in trouble? I smiled softly. Of course. She lowered her voice even though nobody else was in the house. Sometimes Mom talks about you like you are much older than you actually are. I remained silent. Sophie continued carefully. Not in a mean way. At least I do not think she means it that way. But she always talks about helping you, managing things for you, simplifying things for you. Sophie paused. The weird part is that you seem more independent than a lot of people I know. For several moments, neither of us spoke. The honesty of her observation affected me more than she realized, because it confirmed something I had been struggling to trust. My concerns were not existing only inside my imagination. Someone else had noticed the same contradiction. Amanda constantly presented herself as my supporter, yet the image she shared with others often made me appear less capable than I truly was. As Sophie prepared to leave, she stopped at the front door. Grandma, she said, I hope this does not sound bad, but sometimes I think Mom likes people seeing her help more than she likes helping. Then she immediately looked embarrassed. I hugged her and told her not to worry. After she left, I stood alone in my kitchen replaying that sentence. It was not proof of anything. It was not an accusation, but it was the first piece of information that came from someone who had nothing to gain by saying it. And for the first time, I found myself looking backward through years of memories with a completely different set of eyes. After Sophie left that afternoon, I sat alone in my kitchen long after my cup of tea had gone cold. Her words kept repeating in my mind. Sometimes I think Mom likes people seeing her help more than she likes helping. It was such a simple observation, yet it unsettled me because it connected so many moments I had been trying to explain away. For years, I had focused on Amanda's words, her compliments, her concern, her offers to help. I rarely stopped to examine the results of those actions. Now, for the first time, I began looking backward instead of forward. The more memories I revisited, the more uncomfortable I became. I remembered church events where Amanda introduced me as though I needed constant assistance. I remembered family discussions where she answered questions directed at me before I could respond. I remembered gatherings where she organized everything while quietly positioning herself at the center of every important decision. None of those moments had seemed significant on their own. Together, however, they painted a very different picture. One evening, I opened an old photo album Richard and I had assembled years earlier. At first, I only wanted to distract myself. Instead, I found myself comparing those memories with more recent family photographs. The difference was striking. In older pictures, family moments felt natural. People stood together. Conversations seemed genuine. In newer photographs, Amanda appeared prominently in nearly every frame. Sometimes she stood beside me. Sometimes she held my arm. Sometimes she appeared to be helping me with something. Looking at the pictures alone, anyone would conclude she devoted enormous energy to caring for me. Yet I could not stop asking myself a difficult question. How much of that care actually happened when no camera was present? A few days later, I attended a church luncheon. During the meal, a woman I had known for years sat beside me and asked how I was doing. Before I could answer, another member of the group smiled and said, "You are so fortunate to have your daughter-in-law looking after you." The comment was meant kindly. I smiled and thanked her. Then she added something unexpected. Amanda was telling us recently that she worries about you living alone. Again, I felt that familiar sensation. Amanda and I had never discussed concerns about my living situation. In fact, I enjoyed my independence. Yet somehow that version of me continued spreading quietly through conversations I was not part of. Driving home that day, I finally stopped making excuses. Not accusations, not conclusions, just excuses. For months, I had treated every incident as an isolated misunderstanding. But misunderstandings happen randomly. Patterns do not. What troubled me most was not that Amanda occasionally spoke on my behalf. It was that every assumption she made seemed to point in the same direction. Less capable, less involved, less independent. The realization saddened me more than it angered me. Because I genuinely loved Amanda. She was the mother of my granddaughter. She had been part of our family for nearly 2 decades. I did not want to believe there was anything insincere behind her behavior. Yet the evidence kept accumulating. More importantly, I realized something about myself. My loyalty to Amanda had become stronger than my loyalty to my own instincts. Every time I noticed something uncomfortable, I rushed to protect her image rather than trust my own experience. That needed to change. So I made a decision. I would stop searching for explanations. I would stop defending behavior before fully understanding it. Most importantly, I would stop listening only to what Amanda said and start paying attention to what actually happened around her. I did not plan to confront anyone. I did not want an argument. I simply wanted clarity. And although I did not know it yet, that decision was about to reveal far more than I ever expected. Once I stopped searching for excuses, I began noticing things that previously slipped past me. The most surprising part was how little effort it required. I did not investigate anyone. I did not ask difficult questions. I simply observed. For years, I had been listening to Amanda's words. Now I focused on outcomes. And the difference between the two became harder to ignore with every passing week. The first thing I noticed was how often Amanda presented herself as the solution to problems nobody had actually asked her to solve. During family gatherings, she regularly volunteered to manage plans, coordinate schedules, or make decisions before anyone else had the opportunity. Most people appreciated her initiative. Jason certainly did. In his eyes, Amanda was simply organized and dependable. Yet once I started paying attention, I realized something. The more responsibility Amanda assumed, the more invisible everyone else's preferences became. One Saturday afternoon, our family gathered to discuss Christmas plans. The conversation had barely begun before Amanda announced a complete holiday schedule. Dates had been selected. Activities had been organized. Reservations had already been researched. Everyone listened politely. A few people suggested minor adjustments, but Amanda already had answers prepared. By the end of the discussion, what had started as a family conversation felt more like a presentation. Again, nobody complained. Most people actually thanked her. Yet I quietly noticed that very few decisions had truly been made together. Several days later, I received another unexpected insight. Sophie called while walking home from school. During the conversation, she casually mentioned that Amanda had recently volunteered to help coordinate a committee at church. The comment itself was not unusual. Amanda loved community involvement. Then Sophie laughed softly and said something interesting. Mom gets upset when people do not notice how much work she does. The statement sounded harmless. Teenagers often make observations without realizing their significance. Still, it lingered in my mind. Over the following weeks, I began noticing a pattern that connected many separate experiences. Amanda did not simply enjoy helping. She seemed to enjoy being seen helping. There is a difference. Genuine kindness often happens quietly. Amanda's kindness almost always arrived with witnesses. Whether it involved family, neighbors, church members, or friends, someone always seemed to be watching. The realization made me uncomfortable because it forced me to reconsider years of assumptions. Had I mistaken performance for care? Had everyone else done the same? One evening, I attended a small church fundraiser. Amanda was there as well. Throughout the event, I observed her interact with dozens of people. She was charming, friendly, energetic. Every conversation left a positive impression. Yet I noticed something else. Nearly every story she shared positioned her as the helper, organizer, supporter, or problem solver. It was subtle, but once I saw it, I could not stop seeing it. More importantly, I noticed how often those stories involved me. My health, my schedule, my needs, my situation. Amanda rarely said anything negative. In fact, she sounded remarkably compassionate. Yet each story reinforced the same image. Helen needed support. Helen needed assistance. Helen was fortunate to have Amanda looking out for her. Driving home that night, I finally accepted something I had resisted for months. The issue was not a single event. It was not the seating arrangement at Sophie's birthday. It was not the volunteer misunderstanding. It was not one conversation at church. The issue was a pattern of behavior that consistently elevated Amanda's role while quietly diminishing mine. And for the first time, I stopped wondering whether the pattern existed. Instead, I began wondering why. I still had no desire for confrontation. I still hoped there might be an explanation I had not considered. But I also knew one thing with certainty. The next family gathering was approaching, and for the first time in years, I intended to watch everything carefully without explaining any of it away. The family gathering took place 2 weeks before Christmas. Every year, Jason and Amanda hosted a holiday celebration at their home, bringing together relatives, neighbors, and a few close friends. It had become one of the family's favorite traditions. As I drove there that afternoon, I reminded myself of the promise I had made. I was not going to search for problems. I was not going to confront anyone. I was simply going to observe. The house was beautifully decorated when I arrived. Garland wrapped around the staircase. Lights glowed softly from every corner. Holiday music played in the background. Guests mingled throughout the living room, carrying cups of coffee and plates of appetizers. Amanda moved effortlessly among them, greeting everyone with her usual warmth and energy. Within minutes, I heard multiple people complimenting her. They praised the decorations, the food, the organization. Amanda smiled graciously and thanked them. Watching her, I understood why people admired her so much. She knew exactly how to create an impression. For most of the afternoon, I remained quiet. I spoke with relatives, helped Sophie arrange dessert trays, and simply listened. Then, as the evening progressed, something happened that changed everything. A group of guests gathered near the fireplace while Amanda shared stories about holiday traditions. I stood nearby speaking with one of Jason's cousins when I heard my name. Amanda was smiling as she addressed the group. "One thing I have learned over the years," she said, "is that caring for older family members requires a lot of patience." Several people nodded sympathetically. Amanda continued, "Sometimes they do not realize how much help they need. You just have to step in and do what is best for them." The words sounded caring, thoughtful, generous, exactly the kind of statement people expected from her. Yet this time, something was different. This time I was paying attention not only to the words, but also to the assumptions hidden inside them. Before anyone could respond, Amanda added another comment. "Helen still likes feeling independent, but honestly, most of the time I make decisions before situations become overwhelming for her." The conversation around the fireplace suddenly became very quiet. Several guests glanced toward me. Amanda appeared completely comfortable. She seemed to expect smiles and agreement, just as she always had. Instead, something unexpected happened. Sophie spoke first. "Grandma makes plenty of her own decisions." Amanda blinked. The room grew even quieter. Sophie continued before anyone could interrupt. "Actually, she is one of the most independent people I know." Jason looked surprised. Amanda laughed lightly and tried to move the conversation forward. "Of course she is. I only meant that I try to help." But the moment had already shifted. For the first time, someone had challenged the image Amanda spent years creating. Then another relative spoke. "Now that Sophie mentions it, Helen always seems pretty capable whenever I see her." A neighbor nodded in agreement. Suddenly, people were discussing me rather than listening to Amanda describe me. The difference was subtle but powerful. For years, Amanda had controlled the narrative by speaking on my behalf. This time, others were sharing their own observations instead. I said nothing. I did not need to. The most revealing part came next. Amanda attempted to explain herself several times, yet every explanation returned to the same theme. How much she did, how much she managed, how much responsibility she carried. Listening carefully, I realized something important. Amanda was not talking about me at all. She was talking about herself. The room seemed to realize it too. Nobody argued. Nobody accused her of anything. There was no dramatic confrontation. There did not need to be. Because for the first time, everyone could see the difference between genuine concern and the desire to be seen as concerned. And as the evening continued, I quietly understood that Amanda had done something she had never intended to do. She had revealed her true priorities without anyone forcing her to. The drive home that night felt different from every drive I had taken over the previous year. For months, I had questioned myself. I had doubted my instincts. I had searched endlessly for alternative explanations because I wanted to believe the best about Amanda. Now, for the first time, I felt something I had not felt in a very long while. Clarity. Not because there had been a dramatic confrontation, not because anyone had exposed a shocking secret, but because the truth had finally revealed itself through a simple pattern that could no longer be ignored. A few days after the Christmas gathering, Jason called me. His voice sounded thoughtful. We talked about ordinary things for several minutes before he carefully brought up the conversation that had happened near the fireplace. "Mom," he said, "I have been thinking about what Sophie said." I remained quiet. "Honestly," he continued, "I never really noticed how often Amanda speaks for you." There was no anger in his voice, only reflection. I smiled softly. I did not notice it for a long time either. The conversation lasted nearly an hour. For the first time in years, Jason seemed willing to examine things without immediately defending them. That alone felt significant. He did not criticize Amanda. Neither did I. The goal was never to make someone look bad. The goal was to understand what had actually been happening. As the weeks passed, something interesting occurred. Amanda became noticeably quieter whenever conversations involved me. She still acted politely. She still attended family gatherings. She still offered help when needed. Yet she seemed more careful about presenting herself as my spokesperson. I suspect she realized that people had begun paying attention to the difference between helping someone and speaking for them. The greatest surprise came from Sophie. One afternoon she stopped by my house again, carrying her usual backpack and asking for hot chocolate. As we sat together in the kitchen, she smiled and said, "Grandma, you seem happier lately." I laughed. "Do I?" She nodded. "You seem more like yourself." Her observation touched me because she was right. Somewhere along the way, I had allowed myself to become smaller in order to avoid conflict. Every time Amanda spoke for me, I stayed silent. Every time someone made assumptions about my abilities, I let them pass. Every time I felt uncomfortable, I convinced myself that keeping the peace mattered more than speaking honestly. Eventually, those choices added up. Not because Amanda forced them on me, but because I participated in them. That realization taught me something important. The strongest boundaries are not built by confronting other people. They are built by respecting yourself enough to stop surrendering your voice. Looking back now, I do not believe Amanda was motivated entirely by cruelty. In fact, I think the truth was more complicated. She genuinely enjoyed being seen as caring. She genuinely enjoyed being admired. Over time, the image became more important than the relationship itself. She wanted credit for kindness more than connection. And once I understood that, many things suddenly made sense. The lesson I carried away from the experience had very little to do with Amanda. It had everything to do with recognizing the difference between words and actions. Anyone can say they care. Anyone can describe themselves as supportive. Real care is quieter than that. Real care listens before it decides. Real care respects another person's independence instead of slowly replacing it. Months later, as I sat on my porch watching the sun disappear behind the trees, I thought about Richard. My husband always believed that character revealed itself through patterns, not promises. At the time, I thought he was talking about other people. Now I understood he was also talking about myself. Because the moment I stopped judging Amanda by her words and started judging her by her actions, everything became clear. And perhaps the most valuable lesson of all was this: the people who truly care about you never need an audience to prove it.